Roger. Can I ask you something? Yep. I was kicking your ass back there. Did I give you wood? I'm just fucking with you, Father. Forget about it.
This happened to me when I was a younger girl. I was probably 13 at the time and home on summer vacation. My parents worked, so I was home alone for those couple of months during the day. And I was an only child, but I would babysit the kid next door from time to time, and he happened to be with me the day that this happened. It was about 10 in the morning, and we were watching a kids show before I would take him outside into the yard to play. I remember this distinctly because there was still dew on the grass, and I didn't want to go outside and get us both wet. My doorbell suddenly rang, and I got up to answer it, thinking it was another neighbor or whatever. We had a heavy wood door with a glass storm door outside of it, and my parents always told me to keep the chain lock on the wood door at all times when I was home alone. They never said why, but I think they were just trying to be protective of me, and I always did it. So I go to the door and open it with the chain obviously there, only allowing a few inches to be open. The glass door is still there, but I see a guy in, and I will never forget this, white pants and a purple golf shirt or polo shirt, whatever you want to call it. I asked him if he needed anything, and he said he had a delivery to make. I said, okay, you can just leave it on our porch and I'll get it. He said I had to sign for it, and I said, okay, you can just slide your ledger through the door opening. He stood there for a moment and said, no, my ledger's too big. You're going to have to open the door. Immediately, a red flag came up, and I said, no, actually, the door's broken. That was a lie, but it was my only way out of not opening the door for this guy. To this day, I'm still amazed I came up with it as fast as I did. The guy got visibly angry and said, I'm not leaving this package without you signing for it. Open the door. Again, another red flag. I simply said, you're going to have to come back then because the door is broken and my dad is upstairs asleep right now. Totally not true again. My dad had stopped working third shift years before this. He just wasn't home. In a huff, the guy turns around and walks off my porch, and I shut the door, kind of freaking out. I go and get our cordless phone and call my mom at her office and told her that there was a package being delivered. But before I can get my entire story out, I see the guy on our back deck at our back door. He, of course, sees me and starts banging on the glass, saying that he has to deliver this package and I need to open the door. While I'm talking to my mom, I scoop up the kid from next door that I'm babysitting and go to a room where this guy can't see us. And I tell my mom what's happening, and honest to God, she says, Susan, just open the door and let him leave the package. That's when I hear the glass break on the back door. My mom also hears it, and of course, she hears me scream. She finally figures out what's happening, comes to her senses, and tells me to call the police, and that she's going to as well. Yeah, Mom, a little late for that. I am now hysterical, holding on to my little guy from next door, with this man trying to get into the house through the back door. I ran upstairs trying to hang up the phone and call 911 when I hear this guy kicking the door in. I got 911 on the line and was trying to calm down my little guy who was completely upset because I was upset. And that's when the greatest thing happened. The father of my little guy came over to pick him up early to take him out to lunch for a treat. And he noticed that there was an unmarked white van in our driveway, heard the ruckus from behind the house, and ran around to see this guy, who immediately ran around the other side of the house and get into the van and drive off. The police showed up in the next 5 minutes or so, and at first they thought the father of my little guy was the man trying to get in the house and had him in handcuffs before I could tell them that he was okay, and that he could say that he was okay. It didn't take long to work all that out after I came downstairs and went out into the front yard to talk to them. The police went in and out of my house and then said that there were others looking for the van, but to my knowledge they never found the guy and he was never caught. I gave them the best description I could, but mean, who knows? How many white vans are there out on the road? So yeah, that's my scary story. It totally freaked me out, and I wouldn't stay home alone for the next few years, even when I came home from college. Now I can look back and tease my mom about how lax of a mother she was, but we both still understand the scary underlining of what could have been a very, very bad situation. The year was 1996, and I was pregnant with my first child. My ex-husband and I had been living with his parents far too long, and with a baby on the way, we knew we simply had to get a place of our own. It seemed that with the monthly income we made, it would be an impossible goal. That is, until we were made aware of an old house that his grandmother had owned, that had just been sitting, unoccupied, since some incidents. The story goes, my ex-husband's grandma, uncle, and aunt had purchased an older home inside the city limits. This had happened after the state bought their home on the range in order to lay down an interstate and place a rest area back in the 50s. So with their new lump of money, the three of them relocated to this new home. Well, I was told that the aunt had been attacked and sexually assaulted by three men one evening in the alleyway behind the house. This unfortunate event took a toll on her. She quickly lost her mind, and being forced by the state, was placed into a local insane asylum. Basically, her last days were spent in the house. Shortly after being admitted to the insane asylum, she took her own life. Sometime later, the grandmother took a fall down the steep front steps and required round-the-clock nursing care, so she was also admitted to a place. It was a nursing home, but shortly after her admittance, she also passed away. In the end, the only one left in the house was the uncle, who reportedly was already mentally unstable. I imagine all of the other things were too much for him. He attempted to take his own life in the house by slashing his wrists. He wasn't successful, and he was also admitted into a facility for his own safety. So, here sat this house, with its tragic history all shut up for years. My ex-husband and I talked his uncle into letting us live there dirt cheap, and he seemed all too happy to have people in there, and almost excited that someone wanted to live in his home. Growing up, I had a rich past of dealing with the paranormal and the unexplainable, so the history of the house didn't really affect my decision. I just knew I was having a baby and desired to have our own place. Just needed a little bit of sprucing up, I thought. And having some young people in it, and the arrival of a new baby, it would just be what the house needed. My ex worked the night shift at a local restaurant around that time, so he would sleep during the days, which wouldn't leave me much time to get the place ready for moving in. But I figured while that he was at work, in order to kill two birds with one stone, I would go in, clean it up, and give it a fresh coat of paint. The first night I decided to head over there and paint, I remember there being a very unwelcoming feeling about the place when I pulled up. I didn't let it stop me. I just grabbed my gear and headed inside. Once working, I began to wonder if we had made a bad decision about moving into this house. But I've always believed that once you start something, you should finish it and stick it out, no matter what. So, I took a couple of deep breaths, cleared my mind, and started in on the painting. Right away, I knew I was not alone, but I kept hearing odd noises in different parts of the house. I was so determined to get the painting done, I wasn't going to let it deter me. That is, until I began to hear voices and hissing of sorts. I began to feel uneasy, but I still held true to my task. I was in the living room, and on the other side of the wall was a bathroom, which had one of those metal chairs in the shower, used for people who can't stand up and take a shower on their own. I heard some scuffling in that bathroom, and then what sounded like the metal chair being put up abruptly or moved. So I stopped painting and listened a little bit more. That's when I heard the bathroom door shut and more of that hissing. Standing there not moving, still facing the wall with my paint roller in my hand, I was just kind of waiting to see what would come next. I refused to look away from the wall in fear of maybe seeing something. I didn't want to see anything. But I knew in that moment, that spirit or whatever was in the room next to me was now very near me. At this point, I figured that if I showed fear, it would not do much. But the next thing I knew, right in my ear, I heard a whisper say, "Darnell." It knew my name. I dropped that roller right in the paint pan and left that place as quick as I could. Left all the lights on, doors unlocked, with the radio playing. You'd think that I would have decided to revoke the decision to move in at that point. But the situation at my in-laws was less than desirable, that I was getting ready to have my first kid. I felt this just had to happen. Besides, what could really happen? I mean, how bad could it truly get? On a comparative scale, I decided that dealing with this spirit stuff would be a cakewalk compared to dealing with the whole situation at the in-laws' house. I decided at that point it would be best not to tell my ex-husband of what had happened that night. I simply told him that the pregnancy had me feeling exhausted, and I thought it would be best if we finished painting the house on his days off. We lived there for a total of 3 years. One evening, while my husband was at work, I was up late and very pregnant, feeling the need to do some deep cleaning, as the due date of the baby was very near. Mothers refer to this as the old nesting instinct. There I was, standing in the kitchen, and I heard voices coming up from the basement. They sounded strange, like a radio station that wasn't well tuned, but the voices just kept on talking, and then they stopped. I walked over to the door that led to the basement and locked it, and I decided that it would be a good idea to keep that door locked at all times. I would hear the voices in the basement often, but I never mentioned it to my ex-husband. One morning, while I was lying in bed, I happened to notice a set of faint handprints on the ceiling above me. I thought, that's an odd spot for handprints, considering that the ceilings were so tall, but I didn't dwell on it too much. Shortly after that, my husband and I were heading to bed, and we had made it to the bedroom when the television in our living room turned on all by itself. My ex-husband and I just looked at each other, and he walked over and shut it off. The next night, I was awakened by yelling coming from the living room. As I lay there listening, it was obvious that the television had once again turned itself on and had jacked the volume all the way up, all by itself. I found myself once again laying in bed and staring up at the ceiling, and I happened to notice that there were now a few set of handprints up there. It seemed like each time I would look at the ceiling, there would always be more sets of those handprints. Something else that happened was in the dining room. There was this big stain that no matter what I did, no matter what company I hired to clean the carpet, the stain would always reappear. I found this a little peculiar. So I went and asked the uncle where exactly in the house had he cut his wrists. He told me the dining room. After repeated attempts at getting rid of the stain, it became apparent that it was there to stay, so I placed a throw rug over it as a solution to the problem. The voices in the basement, the television randomly turning on by itself, the unexplainable handprints. That's really all we had to deal with. Not so intolerable, right? Well, sometime after our first child was born, the uncle called me in the middle of a night one night, desperately asking me to get him out of this nursing home that he was in. He wanted to come home, so he came home to live with us in his house. We'd been living there for a year at that point. The paranormal activity seemed to cease once he was living with us. I became pregnant with our second child when our firstborn was a year old. The pregnancy was going along accordingly, but around the time I was about 7 months along, I had an accident. It was wintertime, and the front steps were covered in ice. I had been pleading with my ex-husband to make sure that the stairs were ice-free, but he neglected to do it. We were going somewhere, and I was heading down the stairs when suddenly my feet slipped out from under me. In hopes of protecting the baby, I grabbed a hold of the stair rail and sort of aimed my body in a way to land on my back. And mind you, these stairs were very, very steep, and they were the very stairs that his grandmother had met her demise. I was rushed to the hospital, and the baby and I were placed on a 24-hour observation. Thankfully, we were okay, according to the ER doctors. However, The remainder of my pregnancy became extremely difficult. I planned for a natural birth, but turns out it had to be an emergency C-section. When our second baby was 2 months old, my ex-husband's uncle decided out of nowhere to kick us out of the house and take everything from us. We were forced to move, and we never returned. However, when my second child was about 10 months old, I started getting very sick. I wasn't able to hold down any food or liquids, and I always had this very drawn-out sicknesses that no one could pinpoint, and engulfed my life. After the whole runaround with numerous visits to the doctors, ERs, specialists, and painful suffering, I found out the problem 2 years later. It turns out that when I fell on those steep stairs during my second pregnancy, the jolt of my baby's body had crammed my spleen up against my pancreas and up against my spine. The result was it basically killed my spleen, 60% of my pancreas, and severely damaged my spine. I had no idea. I nearly died because of that one fall, and it ultimately stole my physical health. I was only 22 years old, and it kind of caused a spiral effect. Since then, I've known nothing other than surgeries and constant pain. Looking back, I wish I would have just stayed at my in-laws and put up with that, instead of moving into that house. At least, I would still have my health.